The next story, I have to say, is a profoundly tragic one, to say the very least. It's page one on the Mirror, but of course it's everywhere, that serving soldiers were killed trying to, the headline is, trying to feed starving kids. James Henderson, John Zomi Frankham and Damien Sobel, ex-SBS British service people who were protecting an aid convoy in order to, feed, as you know, the civilians of Gaza. Not just there to make sure the food got delivered, but also it got delivered directly to the people who needed it and not into the hands of Hamas.
It's a shocking story, you know. Volunteers cannot become targets. And Netanyahu has said it was a mistake. How could it have been a mistake? The convoy was clearly marked as a humanitarian convoy. People in Gaza have been living, I saw an interview last week of a family who've been living on animal feed for the past 2 months. Kids are starving, people are dying of malnutrition, and yet, and Netanyahu is using this stupid excuse and I think this is a real. To call the deaths of these people an own goal seems disrespectful, and I don't mean it to be, because it's tragic. But this is a massive own goal, I think, for Israel, what they've done here. Because I think what it means is the British government and others cannot support them indefinitely.
Well, they've had Israel's had widespread support across the West, to say the very least, right, for their ongoing fight to get rid of Hamas. Do you think this is an essential turning point?
I think it's part of a series of turning points. I think this has been building for a while. Biden has been extremely frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu now for a long time. I can feel that frustration growing in European capitals as well. We've seen France. Emmanuel Macron has used, was one of the sort of first European leaders to start to use that term ceasefire a little bit more openly. And I think it's very interesting to see Rishi Sunak. I mean, he's talking about those responsible being held accountable. I think what you will see now is that kind of language used more often by European leaders.
Do you think Israel cares? I don't think they care, you see. I don't think they care what the international...
I also think Benjamin Netanyahu has been on this path for a very long time. I mean, and let's also, when we talk about Israel, let's also separate Israel from the Israeli forces and Benjamin Netanyahu. An enormous amount of people were protesting his government in the months leading up to this conflict anyway, because of changes to the Supreme Court, which were deeply, deeply controversial. I mean, if he's becoming a controversial figure in the West, he's a controversial figure in Israel as well.
Right. I mean, there were protests, as you know, only a couple of nights ago. He's called this a grave mistake, but as you rightly described, there will be a subsequent inquiry, which they've promised. That doesn't bring the lives back of those serving soldiers. And it's beyond a tragedy, not least, and it has to be discussed. And, it's a very difficult one, because the question is this, amongst other things, a war crime? Bearing in mind that if you target aid workers...
It feels like it, does it not to you? It feels like it to me.
They were ex-serving soldiers, but nevertheless, as you know, it doesn't... You're right. When you are in circumstances trying to deliver aid to those who need it, always the poorest, always the most vulnerable in the context of a war, at some point you have to start asking extremely difficult questions, whether you are on whatever side, but we should all be on the side of humanity, it seems to me, to say the very least. Tragic. I mean, our heart goes out, of course, to those heroic soldiers, ex-servicemen, but they risked their lives on our behalf, and then they did the same thing, only to meet a tragic end. I mean, there's no upside to that story. Safe to say that I hope their families are proud of what they were doing.